What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, we're going to do a deep dive into all of these Xbox leaks. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, but I do want to talk about every single element of it. And I kind of want to start with the games because that makes me excited. Obviously, there's the Nintendo stuff we got to talk about, the digital next Xbox console, all that jazz. But let's start with some of the highlights of the games coming out. Now, the thing specifically for the games to remember is this was years ago. I believe this was in 2020 that this internal schedule kind of came out. So as we already know, you can tell just by looking at it, a lot of these are kind of out of date. I think they expected Indiana Jones sooner. They expected Elder Scrolls 6 just 2 years after Starfield. I don't know if they actually expected that, but they wrote it down, so maybe they did. But some of the big standouts, well, I just mentioned a few of them. Maybe Elder Scrolls is coming sooner than we think, but that's one of them. Obviously, Oblivion's remaster, that's huge. We had just heard about that, a few weeks, maybe a few months ago. I remember making a video on the rumor, so that's very exciting that now it's pretty much set in stone. Fallout 3 getting the remaster, that's a big one, but a couple that really stand out. Nobody's really talking about the Ghostwire Tokyo sequel. Underrated game. It wasn't amazing, but it definitely wasn't bad. It flew under the radar. Nobody really cared. Nobody really talked about it after like the first day it came out, but I actually really liked that game, and I would absolutely take more from that universe. So seeing that there will be a second one, that's really exciting. A new Doom game, I think that's absolutely massive. And then maybe the biggest for different reasons, Dishonored 3. I think Dishonored 3 is a massive deal. I actually went back and played Dishonored 1 a few months ago. I still haven't gone back to play 2, but that's absolutely enormous. So, again, Indiana Jones being a little sooner than they thought, but those are the big ones. Oblivion, Fallout, Doom, Dishonored, Ghostwire Tokyo. Quite the lead up. And I think one of them said even like a licensed IP, right? So something that maybe we don't even know about yet. Very exciting, and it makes me the most excited for that because you can have some pretty harsh debates that we're about to have in just a second, but the games is what we're all here for at the end of the day, right? Beyond all this, and we got a lot coming out just from Bethesda, not even from anything else, just the Bethesda stuff. Oh, by the way, before I get into the Nintendo and all this other stuff, somebody is totally waking up fired today, and they probably already have been. They're probably crying on the street. It's also been revealed that it was Microsoft. It wasn't even the FTC. So I saw some really funny lines yesterday or last night when this thing leaked where like the FTC is going to win the I don't give an F war, or the FTC just doxed Microsoft. There were some really clever sayings going on, but you know what? Microsoft did it to themselves. So that's pretty funny. We just learned that a few hours ago. Okay, so I kind of want to fly by at least the controller. I'm not a huge controller guy. I mean, I do have my personal favorites throughout the history of time, but I don't really care too much. Interesting that they're doing the haptic feedback. They're also doing improvements. A very kind of odd-looking hybrid controller, I would call it. I mean, it doesn't look terrible or anything, but it's probably the least interesting of the entire thing. We know the next Xbox console next fall, so they've been lying for quite a while, and it seems like they've even fooled leakers, or just leakers have played along, right? Because we've heard about the next PS5 console and like the PS5.5, right? And for the longest time, Microsoft over and over and over, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. It's the Series X and S, and that's it. And even leakers have backed that up. So I don't know if that kind of hurts their reputation, or again, they were doing that on purpose because they also knew, but we see the console. And I want to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of the design. It literally looks like an Echo to me, but it looks fine. I think the biggest thing with it, obviously, you can go into the smaller details, but one of the biggest things is no disc, right? So just all digital. So that all digital future is coming very, very quickly. Now, let me throw my 2 cents in. Again, I mean, this is kind of what I do in these videos. I'm not surprised. I have seen anger online. I've seen people backing Microsoft and blaming like the consumers. I think Jez Corden did that, and that's fair because consumers have like backed off of buying things physically. Here's my issue with it though. Well, number one, I just don't like the future of all digital. We've talked about that 100 times. I don't want to bore you. But Xbox and Phil Spencer and all of them, they've been very vocal on the preservation of games. Like the difference between them and people like, because you can throw out, well, PlayStation, do they care? No, not really. And I mean, we kind of already knew that. Companies like Remedy with Alan Wake only being digital, do they care? No, they don't. but Microsoft has kind of made it a point to be vocal that they do care. So I do think it's a little worse for them that they're going seemingly, and by the next Xbox console, you imagine it's the same as well, all digital in like the next year and then the next 3-4 years after that. It's worse for them, I think, because they're the ones that have been saying that they believe in the preservation of games, which is not true. That's obviously a lie, because if you cared, you wouldn't, I guess that's one way of preserving games, is to keep it on disc. There are others, people have talked about it, kind of like an all-digital library that still hasn't really been built for games. So, leaving that behind, console looks pretty okay. Coolest thing, I think, is just that we've been fooled for the longest time. Like, they are going to have a console. It's probably going to be pretty darn powerful. I'm not all that tech savvy, but it looks pretty powerful, sounds pretty powerful. Obviously, the future for the next Xbox, so 2028. I mean, that's a big thing. We've talked about that a few times. I remember specifically making videos where through all of these court documents, we can kind of lock in, save your money, start saving now, because you got 5 years. In the fall of 2028 is the next Xbox and the next PlayStation, okay? So you can mark that on your calendar for 5 years from now. And it's going to be ambitious, going to be very ambitious, again, with, I think, AI. Testing was one of the features that kind of behind the scenes, I guess, they're working on with it. But the idea that this is really going to be that console that transcends, and I believe they talked about the controller, right? The controller is kind of the most important thing. As long as you have an Xbox controller, you'll be playing the game pretty much anywhere you can think of, in your Tesla, on your TV, on your computer, on your phone. All you need is that controller. So that next Xbox is going to really, obviously take that next step for that. Okay. There's really only two other major things I want to talk about, and it's acquisitions, but it's two different acquisitions, maybe even three. So Valve, WB Games, Nintendo. Okay, quite a bit to get into with this, right? First things first. I don't want to pretend like I haven't seen things, or I want to give people that, that have given me info a little shout out. I'm not going to pretend like this is absolutely brand new. Specifically, the WB Games thing. In fact, I tweeted this, though. WB Games, we had heard about that years ago. It's interesting because now we find out for sure, right? Because, before then it was just kind of a rumor. Now it's kind of locked in. But it shouldn't be all that surprising if you were kind of, in the news cycle back then. It was a long time ago, like 2020, 2019. The Nintendo thing, now I don't remember this. Now, some people swear that this was a thing a few years ago. And by the official things here, it was official a few years ago. 2020, right, is when Phil Spencer was talking about Nintendo. So I don't remember it. I don't think I made any videos on it, so that's maybe just a big void in my kind of portfolio. Obviously, there was the story of the early 2000s Xbox or Microsoft that tried to buy Nintendo and they laughed them out of the room. So there was that like funny kind of like lore story there. But I just want to kind of throw that out. People have said that's not new. That's something we've already heard. I don't remember it, but that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean that it actually didn't happen. And then Valve. Valve was another one that Phil kind of threw in there. So that would be enormous. Now, a couple extra things to say. WB Games, I mean, there's not, I guess for that, it's on a smaller magnitude than Nintendo, okay? Nintendo kind of gets its own part of this video. For WB Games, it would be interesting. I don't think you would do WB Games and Activision Blizzard yet again. We haven't seen the next couple of years in which Microsoft probably does that anyway. The Nintendo thing is too big, okay? Now, my stance on this, and I get it, I'm sure Sony has talks. And I want to make this known because this is what I think non-fanboys do, is they make things known that like other companies probably do similar things. I'm sure Sony has said some things behind the scenes about Microsoft and vice versa. Well, now we know Microsoft has said some things about Sony. The odd thing with this entire court case is we've heard a lot about what Microsoft thinks about Sony, what they thought about the PS5 when it first came out, how they thought theirs was better in pretty much every way. We had heard, and I made a video on it a few months back. Remember, Microsoft does want Sony dead. Now, the issue I've always had, just to make it as transparent as possible, I get that these companies behind the scenes probably want each other completely out, right? I am positive that if you searched Sony or Jim Ryan, you'd find somewhere where he talked about the death of Xbox and wanting to be the only one. The issue is we've seen it with Microsoft, right? We haven't seen it necessarily with PlayStation. But the thing for me is just lying and just like feigning this like ignorance. That's what I've said this before with like Phil Spencer for a lot of things. That's my number one complaint is like I get the corporate talk versus like the consumer down to earth talk. I just don't like it. I don't like the idea that when they say, and this is where I want to build up to, right? My biggest issue with this entire thing, we know that this is not Microsoft being competitive, right? Buying Activision Blizzard doesn't make Xbox competitive. It's a step in the direction of ending everybody else. That's the entire. Now, whether you want to say, well, they could have changed their tune in the past couple of years, that's possible. However, the emails that, this is, again, older stuff. The emails of them, like, wishing death upon, like, they don't want Sony around anymore, right? And then when you buy Activision Blizzard and you're actively trying to buy Nintendo, one of the major ones, I no longer think that you're being competitive anymore. I think that you're out for blood. Now, here's the thing. Here's the final part to it. That's okay. Like, if you don't care about that, you don't care. Ultimately, as I've said, I care about the games. I care about the products. I definitely don't want Nintendo being bought by literally anybody. I never wanted Activision Blizzard to get bought. I never want Ubisoft to get bought. Like, I'd prefer them to all stay by themselves, right, alone. In the world that we're in, is that necessarily possible? No. So when an opportunity does come, you kind of just hope for the better one. Would I prefer Microsoft buys Nintendo over, like, Tencent? Yes. I'd have them buy it 10 different times over that, right? And that's the kind of situation we're in. Would I ever want Microsoft or Xbox to own Nintendo? Not in a million years. But would I prefer somebody else to do it? Then you have to start comparing. Then you have to start saying, well, this is a stupid world we live in, and I guess you have to pick the lesser of two evils, right? And that's where I stand on it. But I did just want to throw it out there because, yes, it's possible that other companies, maybe Sony, has approached Nintendo to do it. And I would, by the way, I would not like that either. This is not like a super anti-Xbox video. I would despise Sony if they did. Like, I would not agree with that decision. So this is not a fanboy thing. I hate that idea. I hate that Phil Spencer had said, about, like, his legacy. That's very, like, Disney to me. It comes off as, like, some of the CEOs Disney even has right now or has had in the past. I definitely don't like hearing. I mean, he followed that up by saying, right, it's also what's best for the companies. But talking about your legacy, no. That's corporate talk. He's doing it in emails that really aren't supposed to be seen by us. But that's the thing. You kind of get a peek behind the curtain and you say, wow, these people aren't all that amazing, right? Like, they're out for blood for each other, which is fine. That's the nature of the business. But then they lie about it. They tell us that, well, we're just being competitive. Sony did it too, right? Putting up a huge fuss about Activision Blizzard and then sending emails behind the scenes saying, we're going to be fine. Like, that's also a bad thing, right? Again, this is not anti-Xbox. I hate that too. That is so dumb why you would do that. But, you got to, I guess, play a little tricky. It's just, I guess, magnitudes of, like, which one's worse, but it's not necessarily a comparison. I'm not a fan. Please, for the love of God, leave Nintendo alone. I don't think Nintendo would sell to anybody, but yet again, Phil Spencer said in that email, right, where it's kind of a long game. Like, he sees it as a long game. Maybe Nintendo does eventually do it. Now, people are saying, thank God that the Switch sold, right? If the Switch bombed, then Nintendo would probably be under Microsoft right now, which would be, in my opinion, not good whatsoever. So there you go. Hopefully I was fair. If not, you can leave your dislike and maybe yell at me in the comments, and I'll yell at you back. Remember, I'm respectful to you all as long as you're respectful to me, but then gloves come off if that's not the case. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.